we've had government by announcement, not by delivery, and certainly not by persuasion. And that has allowed the likes of Anderson and Farage, for example, to get themselves into Parliament and become spokespeople for these thugs on our streets. And I think that, the response of politicians on the centre left and the centre right needs to be more than just announcements. It needs to be delivery to rebuild trust, consistent application of the law, tough application of the law, but also at the same time a persuasion amongst the public about what's right and wrong. And there is clearly nothing right about people at the back of a vigil for 3 young girls who have just died, attacking anything, never mind a mosque, a place of worship.
Over the course of this weekend, far-right activists are planning weekend rallies in at least 8 towns and cities across the UK. There are posters and graphics being shared on the messaging app Telegram and indeed other social media channels, calling for patriots to take action, saying enough is enough. We heard the Prime Minister announce the formation of a new national violent disorder programme, but there are renewed calls for tech firms to crack down on the social media activity, which is in at least part fuelling what has been going on over the last few days. Jack, can we start with you on this? Because it's a classic for me where there are so many parts to this that's trying to work out where intervention is required. Well, is it difficult? Is the suggestion of intervening in policing and calling on social media companies to do more, is this intervention in the right way and in the right places?
Well, it sounds like the right thing to do. I think it will be very important for the new government, given the message that they have been putting out over the past month, that they are serious when they make these kind of announcements and they are focused on delivery rather than just spinning an announcement. It will be very important for the public to see some reassuring action on this following the meeting yesterday. But it seems to me eminently sensible to have a national coordinated effort to deal with this and to put more pressure. I would put even more pressure than they are planning on the social media companies. I think what we've seen over the last few days, where a group of horrible, racist, violent thugs exploit a situation on the night when a vigil is taking place, when these kids have just been died and in some cases perhaps been injured in ways that might affect their whole lives. It's just unbelievable. And it's not good enough just to say, well, there was a riot last month and nobody did anything about that, so you're not being even-handed here. The reality is that somebody's got to take a stand at some point, and particularly when we've got members of Parliament in Westminster who are now helping incite this behaviour quite deliberately, then I think there needs to be a tough national response.
Tina, come in on this in terms of, as we say, the kind of stages of intervention and whether it's possible to police the internet, for example.
Well, one of my concerns is if we is when politicians sort of refer to misinformation or disinformation, and sort of almost as a that's if we can tackle that, that's a solution to all ills. And it's just not as straightforward as that. And we need to separate out the criminal activity online that must be tackled. Anything that is criminal in real life is criminal online, and there should be no tolerance of that whatsoever. But what we have found in recent times is that misinformation and disinformation is also becoming politicised in a way as a sort of as a label for things that we find disagreeable. And so if you get politicians starting to demand that the social media companies crack down on mis and disinformation, you are asking them then to become editorial judges of debates and activity, which is, as I say, not illegal, not criminal, but some people don't like, and it gets very, very messy. So I think I think that's a sort of an area which I wouldn't rush into at all. And I think what I do think is really important is that that when it comes to the scenes that we've seen over the last few nights, I mean, clearly this is outrageous behaviour. And we want the police to act strongly against any kind of thuggery. And I mean, there are people out there who look for excuses in order to be, absolutely violent, and they don't need much encouragement. But we must also ensure, and I think politicians have got a real responsibility here, to take seriously the genuine concerns of ordinary good citizens who do worry sometimes that there is a willingness of politicians to intervene or seek to be, to make sure that we don't react badly to certain kind of events, like what we've seen, say, for instance, in Hare Hill, or what we saw at Manchester Airport, and take a slightly different tone with other kind of situations. So I think what I would look for from the Prime Minister is to be consistent and make sure if he is stepping up what he's demanding of the police, he also says, and we need to see much more robust policing, for example, when there are protests in London and there is, violence that we've seen that the police have been perhaps not quick enough to clamp down on.
It's interesting you say that because just as you're speaking, Anne gets in touch. And Jack, we've had quite a lot of messages to this sort of effect. Anne says, why an instant tough response to the far right? The hard left has paralysed London for months, made it a no-go area for Jews, and its foot soldiers pandered to as they sit on roads stopping the lawful and damage property. By all means, crack down on the hard right, but Labour must be fair in its tough responses. Alluding, I think, there to Just Stop Oil protests that have been taking place as well. What do you make of that kind of, equality of discipline?
I think equality, consistency, I think persuasion as well as announcements. I think all of these things are really important. If you look at the situation at Manchester Airport recently, for example, it seems to me as an observer, I'm not aware of all of the facts, obviously, but having watched it carefully and not commented immediately, that there was some violent thuggery going on against the police in that security area at Manchester Airport. But then a police officer kicked somebody who was basically defenceless on the floor in the head. Both of these things are wrong. And I think the job of politicians is to be clear about that and to explain why both are wrong and both are not going to be accepted. And I think that's I think part of the problem here in recent years has been that we've had government by announcement, not by delivery, and certainly not by persuasion. And that has allowed the likes of Anderson and Farage, for example, to get themselves into Parliament and become spokespeople for these thugs on our streets. And I think that the response of politicians on the centre left and the centre right needs to be more than just announcements. It needs to be delivery to rebuild trust, consistent application of the law, tough application of the law, but also at the same time a persuasion amongst the public about what's right and wrong. And there is clearly nothing right about people at the back of a vigil for 3 young girls who have just died, attacking anything, never mind a mosque, a place of worship. There's just nothing right about that at all. And the fact that somebody else attacked somewhere else a month ago isn't a justification for that. And if this is when we draw the line in the sand, let's get it drawn.
But I think, if I may, I mean, you mentioned Just Stop Oil a moment ago, which is obviously a different kind of demonstration to the violence that we've seen. However, I do think it's always important for us to remember that the summer of 2018 was a seismic event when we saw these protests in London where Waterloo Bridge was taken over and closed down for several days, big junctions in the middle of the city. And both politicians who supported the cause and very mainstream politicians of both all the main parties, the police, everybody took a tolerant position initially in response to those demonstrations. And ordinary people thought, what the hell is going on here? We thought that this kind of protest was not allowed, that we would be able to still walk down the street and what have you when people are exercising their right to protest and demonstrate. So I think we all need to be sort of recognise that we've gone wrong over the last few years in the way in which we have sought to uphold sort of, basic tenets of society, and what too many good people are looking for now from us as politicians is to make sure that we are acting in a way that they can understand and represents what they stand for. And that means that we've got to be tough when it comes to actions which are unacceptable, whoever it is who is responsible for them.
Jack, I want to pick up on a point that I think, Tina, that you were making about legitimate concerns that people may have. And I'll just read you this message, which kind of sums up what a lot of people have been saying this morning, getting in touch with us. Yes, dreadful and disgusting, the disinformation and the social media companies doing nothing about it. But we need to ask ourselves why people feel compelled to get angry and protest. There are underlying issues that need addressing. If social issues were addressed, then these people wouldn't be fearful and angry. Just a thought, says Kim. And I know that all of this swelled from misinformation online about the person being responsible for the Southport attacks being an illegal immigrant who was a Muslim. But the reality is, if people are concerned about immigration, the Labour government has come in, it's scrapped the Rwanda policy. Some people have legitimate concerns about the levels of immigration into this country. Isn't the thing we're not really addressing here that people have legitimate concerns? Okay, they're absolutely demonstrating it in completely the wrong way, but doesn't that need to be addressed, Jack?
Absolutely. People have been let down so badly that, and this is pretty much on all sides, that the anger can then erupt. And I think I don't know the Leeds situation particularly well, but I can imagine that there are communities in the country where wrongly and far too spontaneously, people's general frustration with the authorities and with their condition of life means that they will join a protest in minutes, regardless of what that protest might have been sparked by. So I think that's why I made the point about what's been said over the past month. I think a period now of responsible government that is not about just making announcements, not about just positioning and dividing, and certainly not about tolerating the way people like Lee Anderson, who was tolerated at the highest levels of the Tory party and is now involved in inciting some of this behaviour as a Reform MP. We must move on from that period. And we need responsible government that's stable and consistent, that's focused on delivery, that people can see is acting on the concerns about their daily lives. And I see what you're saying about the Rwanda scheme being cancelled, but there's a real pressure now, I think, on the Labour government to deliver on its border force and the other measures that it wants to bring in as an alternative. So. This government has to be focused on that delivery, because it's on the delivery of change, delivery of a consistent application of the law and of equitable access to public services and so on, that will create the trust that will then allow the government to be accepted as the lead that people are looking for in these very, very difficult inflammatory situations.